My daughter-in-law said, "Mom, tomorrow morning please go to the market for me. You can take my car." But I knew she had sabotaged the brake system. I still smiled, nodded, and agreed, then quietly handed the keys to her own mother instead. And that night, a phone call changed everything. There are moments in life when time seems to stop, moments when your heart pounds so hard you can hear it echoing in your ears, moments when every cell in your body knows with unmistakable clarity that what you are about to discover will change everything, forever. That moment came to me on an October night in the garage of my own home, the red brick townhome in West Baltimore that my husband and I built, almost brick by brick 40 years ago. The home where I raised my son, the home that now felt like a prison. My name is Bernadine Cole. I am 68 years old, and that night I discovered my daughter-in-law wanted to kill me. If you're still listening and you feel a little tightening in your chest, stay with me. In the next part, I'll tell you how it all began, from the day the first snake stepped into this red brick house, and I allowed it to stay. It was 11 o'clock at night. Everyone in the house was fast asleep, except me. For months, sleep had slipped through my fingers like water. I pulled on my old blue robe, the one Edward, my late husband, had given me on our last anniversary together. My hands trembled as I held the small flashlight I'd found in the kitchen drawer. 6 hours earlier, Monique, my daughter-in-law, had asked me for a favor, wearing that smile of hers. The fake smile that no longer fooled me. The smile she wore like a mask. "Mom," she said, sitting in the living room painting her nails a blood-red color, "tomorrow morning, could you go to Lexington Market for me? You can take my car. Your car is too old. It looks terrible. Besides, mine has air conditioning, the weather is hot, and it'll be better for you." I looked at her. Something flickered in Monique's eyes. Not concern, but something cold, calculated. "My car?" I asked, genuinely surprised. Monique had never allowed me to touch anything of hers, not her clothes, not her perfumes, and certainly not the silver-gray sedan she bragged about as if it were a Mercedes, when in truth, they had bought it on installments using the money I loaned them. "Yes, I won't need it tomorrow. The keys are on the table by the door. Just take it." There was something in her voice, something stiff, artificial. She looked at me as if she were waiting to see how I would respond. That was when the alarm bell inside my head rang. That little voice people often choose to ignore because they don't want to seem paranoid. But I wasn't unfamiliar with that voice. I had learned to listen to it, after bitter lessons, humiliations, and tears I had swallowed in silence. All right. Thank you," I said. Monique smiled, a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Perfect. So tomorrow morning, take my car, okay?" She said it, and walked away as if nothing important had been said. As if she hadn't just suggested something she would never normally offer me. That night, when everyone was snoring, I quietly walked down to the garage. My bare feet touched the cold cement floor. The garage smelled of motor oil and that suffocating odor only enclosed spaces have. Monique's silver-gray sedan sat next to my old station wagon. 2 cars, side by side, like 2 different worlds coexisting under one roof. I crouched down. I aimed the flashlight under the car, and I saw it. A small puddle of fluid, yellow, oily, brake fluid. My heart stopped for a moment. I continued shining the light. The brake line running from the master cylinder to the front wheel had a cut, not a worn-out tear, not damage from an accident, a clean, precise, deliberate cut made by something very sharp. Someone had sabotaged the car, and Monique had asked me to drive it. I sank onto the cold garage floor, my back against the concrete wall, shaking uncontrollably. Not from the cold, but from fear, from fury, from a sorrow so deep it felt like it seeped into my bones. My daughter-in-law, the mother of my granddaughter, the woman my son chose to build a life with. That woman wanted me dead. This wasn't paranoia. It wasn't the imagination of an overly suspicious old woman. It was real. As real as the brake fluid slowly dripping onto the cement. In that moment, only one question echoed in my mind. How did I end up here? How did I allow my life to slide into this? If you're feeling a chill down your spine right now, that is exactly what I felt that night. Alone in the dark garage, staring at a puddle of brake fluid, and knowing that someone I once trusted was plotting against my life. Don't go yet, because what happened after that was not just a near accident, but a whole game of chess I was forced to play to the end. To truly understand what that night meant, I need to take you back 3 years earlier. Back to the day Monique Harris first stepped into my home. She arrived smelling of sweet perfume, smiling brightly, dressed as if attending a party. And I, naive, trusting, opened the door and welcomed her with open arms. If I had known then what I know now, I would have locked that door and thrown the key down a well. But I didn't. And that was the beginning of my downfall, a descent straight into hell. Before I tell you what happened next after that horrific discovery in the garage, before I tell you how I turned the tables and fought back, there is one thing you need to understand. This story is real as the air you're breathing. If you've experienced something similar, if you know someone who's living in a silent hell inside their own family, stay until the end. Because what I did afterward changed everything, and maybe, just maybe, it can help you too. Please subscribe to the channel to hear more stories like this. Stories about women who refuse to be broken. Stories that deserve to be brought into the light. Now, let's return to where it all began. Back to the day I met the snake that almost swallowed my life whole. 3 years before that night in the garage, I was a different woman. I won't say I was completely happy. Edward, my husband, had passed away 5 years earlier from a sudden heart attack while watering the roses in our garden. He collapsed right there among the red roses he loved so much. He must have died doing something he loved, the neighbors said, trying to comfort me. But I was left alone with a house too big, and a silence too heavy. I was 63 at the time. My hair was silver, neatly tied back. My wrinkles were honestly earned, years of working, raising a child, caring for my parents until their last breath. My body was no longer young, but I was far from being past my expiration date. Every morning I still walked to the market. I cooked. I cleaned the house from top to bottom every week. I had my own routine. I had my own peace. Edward left me a comfortable inheritance. The red brick townhome in Edmondson Village, valued at $450,000. The small Ocean View condo in Ocean City we bought back when we were still energetic, worth nearly $300,000. And a modest but sufficient amount of savings in the bank. I wasn't rich, but I didn't depend on anyone. And believe me, that's a luxury many women my age don't have. My son Stephen, everyone calls him Steve, visited me every Sunday. He brought pastries from Hope Bakery on Harford Road, and we sat in the kitchen drinking coffee. He told me about his job, a civil engineer working on bridges for the city. He talked about his projects, and I asked him whether he was eating well, whether he was sleeping enough, just the simple things a mother asks her son. Steve was 35 then, black hair like his father, tall, large hands rough from labor. A good man. At least, that's what I believed at the time. One Sunday in March, he came over looking completely different. His eyes sparkled. His smile was so wide, it almost didn't fit on his face. "Mom," he said as I was pouring coffee, "I met someone." My heart skipped from joy. Finally! I had waited years for my son to find someone to build a life with. So one day, I could hold a grandchild in my arms. "Really? Tell me about her." "Her name is Monique, 28, works in marketing. Mom, she's incredible. I've never felt like this before." His voice was overflowing with emotion. so much that it washed over me, too. He talked about her for almost an hour, about how they met at the gym near Inner Harbor, about her smile, about her intelligence, about her beauty. I want to bring her over next Sunday so you can meet her. Is that okay? Of course, son. This is your home. It will always be your home. That week, I cleaned the house like I was preparing to welcome the Queen of England. I bought fresh flowers for the dining table. I cooked my famous pot roast, the dish I'd always believed I made better than anyone. I wanted to make a good impression. I wanted that girl to know my son came from a good family. If you've ever been a mother, you'll understand that feeling. Nervous as if you're the one going to be interviewed, except the one being interviewed is your family. You're afraid your son will get hurt, afraid you'll say the wrong thing and ruin his happiness. What I didn't know that day was that I wasn't just preparing dinner for my son's new girlfriend. I was opening the door for a storm to walk into my life. The next Sunday, right at 2 p.m, the doorbell rang. I opened the door, and there she was. Monique was about 5'5", thin. Too thin for my taste. The kind of person you look at and immediately know she avoids carbs. Her long black hair was straightened, with honey-colored highlights shimmering in the sunlight. She wore tight white jeans, a bright pink sleeveless blouse, high heels, even on a Sunday, and more makeup on her face than the total amount I had worn in my entire life combined. She smelled of expensive perfume, the kind where a small bottle costs more than $100. She reached out her hand, not for a hug, just a perfectly manicured hand with nude-colored polish. "Very nice to meet you, Mrs. Bernadine. Steve told me so much about you." Her voice was sweet to the point of tasting like cough syrup. Come in. I'm very happy to meet you," I said, smiling. They stepped inside. Monique's eyes swept around the living room. I saw how her gaze paused on every detail. The wooden furniture Edward and I bought 30 years ago, the hand-embroidered curtains my mother-in-law made, the silver-framed family photos on the cabinet, the painting of the Last Supper on the main wall. "What a traditional home," she said. Traditional. She didn't say warm, she didn't say beautiful, just traditional, as if this were a slightly dusty museum. "Thank you," I replied, unsure whether that was meant as a compliment. During dinner, Monique barely touched the pot roast. "It's a bit heavy for me," she said, still smiling. Steve ate enough for both of them, praising my cooking, as always. Monique talked endlessly about her work at an advertising agency, about the important clients she handled, about the events she attended. She mentioned clothing brands, restaurants, and venues I had never heard of in my life. At one point, while I was in the kitchen washing dishes, I heard her say to Steve, quietly, but not quiet enough, "Your mom must feel lonely in this big house. Has she ever thought about selling it and buying something smaller?" The blood in my veins went cold, but Steve said, "Mom loves this house. Her whole life is here." Of course, Monique replied. "I just think it must be a lot to maintain." When they were getting ready to leave, Steve hugged me at the door. "What do you think of her?" I should have told the truth, that something about this girl unsettled me, that she seemed fake, calculating. But I looked at my son's love-struck face, and I couldn't do it. If you're happy, I'm happy. A lie. The first lie in the long chain of lies I would end up telling myself in the years that followed. In the months that followed, Steve brought Monique over more and more often. She still smiled politely, but her words were entirely different. "Mrs. Bernadine, don't you ever feel sad living alone in such a big house? Steve told me your husband left you very comfortable. How lucky, isn't it? This neighborhood is getting old. There are much nicer areas now." And I, like a blind woman, simply smiled and let it pass. One afternoon, I found Monique alone in my bedroom. She was standing by my vanity, picking up each family photo one by one. "Are you looking for something?" I asked from the doorway. She turned, pretending to be startled. "Oh, I must have wandered in by accident. Was looking for the bathroom. These photos are lovely. Is this the vacation condo in Ocean City Steve mentioned? Must be worth a fortune now, right? I froze. How did she know about the condo? Yes, I said, my voice turning cold. Monique only smiled and strolled out of my bedroom as casually as if she were leaving a hotel suite. That night, I tossed and turned. My instincts told me something was deeply wrong, but I still couldn't see the whole picture. 6 months after the day I met Monique, Steve told me, "Mom, I proposed to Monique." She said yes. I should have cried tears of joy. Instead, I felt a stone drop into my stomach. "Congratulations, son," I said, hugging him, saying exactly what a mother is supposed to say. But in my head, a small voice was screaming, "Hold on to him! Hold on to the house!" I didn't listen, and that became my second big mistake. The wedding was my first major loss. One Tuesday afternoon, Monique came over with a thick folder in her arms. She sat on my sofa as if it were her own home. "Mom, we need to talk about the wedding." I wiped my hands and sat across from her. Monique opened the folder and laid everything out. Photos of ballroom-like venues, French menus, a wedding dress worth half a year of my old salary. "These are what we want. A garden venue at a resort overlooking the Maryland Valley, around 200 guests, a 5-course dinner, live band, premium bar, and my dress has to be ordered from Boutique Casa Real." Then she listed it out, crisp and firm. $5,000 for the venue, $8,000 for catering, $4,000 for the dress, $2,000 for flowers, $3,000 for the band. "Monique, that's more than $20,000. $32,000, she corrected instantly. "This is an investment. People only get married once in their life, right, Mom?" She continued, her voice gentle, her words razor sharp. "Steve is your only son. Traditionally, the groom's mother covers the main cost. And you don't want this to be a mediocre wedding, do you? When you have grandchildren later, it'd be so meaningful if your son had a perfect memory of his wedding day." She used the image of my future grandchildren to pressure me, and painfully, it worked. "I'll think about it." "Of course, but we have to make the deposit this week, otherwise we'll lose the spot." She stood up and left the folder on my table like a perfectly prepared trap. If you've ever had that gut feeling telling you to say no, but your mouth can only manage, "Let me take care of it," you'll understand me then. Sometimes we're not afraid of losing money. We're afraid of being labeled a bad mother. That night, I called Steve. "Your fiancé came to talk about the wedding." "I know, Mom. I know it's a lot of money, but Monique is right. It's once in a lifetime. I can't afford it all. My savings have to go toward the apartment deposit." "You're looking for an apartment?" "Yes. We want to move out. We can't live off you forever." The phrase "live off you" echoed in my head for a long time. This was the house he grew up in, yet now it was living off me. "Steve, you were never living off me. This is your home." "I know, but I'm 35. I need my own family. So, will you help us with the wedding, Mom?" I sighed, knowing I had already lost. "Yes, all right. I'll help." "I love you, Mom." He hung up before I could respond. The next day, I went to the bank and withdrew $32,000, the money Edward and I saved for old age and emergencies. I handed it to Monique in an envelope. I hoped for a hug, a sincere thank you. But all I got was, "Perfect, Mrs. Bernadine. Just in time. We almost lost the venue." She shoved the envelope into her Gucci purse without even opening it. The wedding took place in June, in a garden as beautiful as a painting, exactly what Monique wanted. She glowed in her fitted white dress. Steve looked nervous but radiant in his gray suit, and I wore a navy dress from a thrift store because most of my money had gone into their wedding. I cried throughout the ceremony, not out of joy, but because I watched my son place his life in the hands of a woman who only saw numbers where love should have been. At the reception, Monique didn't call me mother-in-law. "This is Mrs. Bernadine, Steve's mother." Light, distant, like introducing an acquaintance. Monique's mother, Lillian, was the complete opposite. Short, brown-skinned, calloused hands from labor. She worked cleaning jobs to get by. It's such a beautiful wedding. I couldn't contribute much, but seeing my daughter happy is enough, she said with a gentle smile. I liked her immediately. She had the humility her daughter lacked. Monique barely acknowledged her mother the whole evening, even seated her at the very last table. Lillian didn't complain. She just watched her daughter with pride tinged by sadness. After the wedding, they spent 5 days honeymooning in Cancun, fully inclusive resort. Steve never asked, but Monique said one well-timed line. "A honeymoon would be wonderful, but I guess we'll have to postpone. The wedding cost so much." And like a fool, I wired them another $5,000. When they returned, sun-kissed and glowing, Steve hugged me. "Mom, you're going to be a grandma." My heart should have burst with joy, but the first thing I felt was fear. 2 weeks later, Steve came alone and sat at my kitchen table. "Monique is pregnant. Our apartment is too small and the baby's coming. Could we stay here for a while, just until we save enough for a bigger place?" I should have said no. I should have protected my space, my peace. But when I looked into my son's eyes, the same eyes he had when he was 5, running home with scraped knees, I couldn't. "Of course, son. This is your home." With that one sentence, I signed my own sentence. A week later, they arrived with suitcases and boxes. They took the 2 main bedrooms, then turned to me with a request. "Mrs. Bernadine, could you move to the back room? It's smaller but cooler, and it's better to keep the baby close to us." The back room, basically a storage space, small, narrow, with one window facing the alley. No closet, just an old single bed. "It's all right, I can move," I said. I folded my life into a few cardboard boxes. Edward's photos all pushed under the bed. My entire world, compressed into a dark, damp, low-ceilinged room. That first night, lying on the creaking bed and staring at the stains on the ceiling, I understood one thing with painful clarity. This house no longer belonged to me. And the worst part was, this was only the beginning. Elijah was born on a Tuesday in February at 3 a.m. I was in the hospital waiting room, wearing an old sweater and with my hair tied up messily. Steve kept running in and out of the delivery room, pale and anxious, gripping his phone as if it were a lifeline. After 8 hours of labor, I heard a cry, a sharp cry announcing a new life. Steve came out with red eyes. "It's a boy, Mom. A handsome little boy." I hugged him. In that moment, everything else disappeared. I was about to become a grandmother. I had a grandson. They let me go in. Monique was lying on the bed, drenched in sweat, hair a mess, but wearing the triumphant smile of someone who had just won something important. She was holding a tiny bundle wrapped in a blue blanket. "Come here, Mrs. Bernadine. Meet Elijah." I walked closer. I saw the scrunched-up red face, the closed eyes, the clenched fists. My heart melted. "Hello, sweetheart," I whispered. "Welcome to the world." Monique placed the baby in my arms. He was almost weightless. He smelled of powder and miracles. "You're going to help me a lot with the baby, right, Mrs. Bernadine?" Monique said in a tired voice. "Because I don't know anything about babies, and Steve works all day." I should have heard alarm bells ringing in those words, but I was spellbound, staring at my grandson. "Of course, dear. That's why I'm here." I didn't know I had just signed a slave contract. The first days were beautiful. Elijah cried, ate, slept. I helped however I could. I warmed bottles, washed his tiny clothes, rocked him when Monique needed to rest. But the honeymoon lasted 1 week. One night, Elijah would not stop crying. It was 2 a.m. I was in my small room trying to sleep when I heard knocking at the door. Mrs. Bernadine, wake up." I opened the door. Monique stood there in a pink satin pajama set, the baby wailing in her arms and anger on her face. "He won't stop crying. I can't take it anymore. You have experience. You raised Steve. Here." She shoved the baby into my arms and walked back to her bedroom. She locked the door. I stood there in the dark hallway with my crying grandson, not understanding what had just happened. I took him to my small room. I changed his diaper. It was dirty. I prepared a bottle. He was hungry. I rocked him for an hour until he finally fell asleep in my arms. At 5 a.m, when I finally laid him in the crib and went back to bed, I barely had time to close my eyes before my alarm rang. I had to get up and make breakfast. That was the first night, but not the last. It became routine. Monique woke me every night. "Mrs. Bernadine, the baby!" And I, like an automated machine, got up to change diapers, make bottles, rock him to sleep, wash the endless mountain of baby clothes, sterilize bottles, clean the nursery that Monique messed up and never cleaned. During the day, while Elijah slept, Monique watched TV. She painted her nails. She chatted on the phone with friends. She went out to get some air and came back 3 hours later with bags of new clothes. I cooked, I cleaned, I washed, ironed, took care of the baby. Steve left the house at 7 a.m. and returned at 8 p.m. He came home exhausted, defeated, shoulders slumped. He ate whatever I had left covered on the stove, kissed Elijah goodnight, and went into the bedroom. One Sunday I tried to talk to him. "Son, I need to talk to you." He was sitting in the living room watching football with the volume low so as not to wake the baby. "Go ahead, Mom." I sat beside him. I searched for the right words. "Robert, I'm happy to help with Elijah. He's my grandson, and I love him. But I feel like I'm doing everything. Monique doesn't get up at night. She doesn't change diapers. She doesn't cook. I understand she had a difficult delivery, but it's been 3 months, and—" "Mom, please." He cut me off without looking at me. "Monique has postpartum depression. The doctor said so." "Has she gone to see a doctor?" "Well, not officially, but she feels that way. She's very sensitive, and I can't take time off work. With the baby, expenses have tripled. If I start arguing with her, she'll drive me crazy. You have experience. You know how this is. I'm just asking you. Help us a bit longer, just a little longer until she feels better." A bit longer. Those 3 words became my chains. "All right, dear." But it wasn't all right. Nothing was all right. Monique stopped calling me mother-in-law. Now I was just Bernadine. "Bernadine, breakfast." "Bernadine, iron this blouse for me. I need it today." "Bernadine, take this to the dry cleaners." "Bernadine, sweep the living room. There are crumbs everywhere." As if I were her employee. No, worse. An employee gets paid, gets days off, gets told thank you. I got nothing. One afternoon, while I was folding baby clothes in the living room, I heard Monique on the phone with someone. She was in the backyard, but her voice carried through the thin walls. "Yes, girl, I swear I live like a queen. I've got someone cooking, cleaning, taking care of the baby. It's like having a free nanny, but better because you don't have to pay her. And the best part is, Steve thinks his mom does it because she wants to. He says she loves helping." She laughed. A sharp, mocking laugh. "I just have to say I'm tired and she does everything. This is the best thing that's ever happened to me." I froze with a baby diaper in my hand. Is that how she saw me? As a free nanny? That night, I didn't eat dinner. I wasn't hungry. I went into my small room, sat on the bed, and for the first time in months, I cried. I cried for Edward, who would have been able to protect me. I cried for the house that no longer felt like mine. I cried for the respect I had lost. I cried for my son, who had become blind. But above all, I cried for myself, for the woman I once was, whom I no longer recognized in the mirror. I was 65, wrinkles deeper than the year before, purple circles under my eyes from sleepless nights, hands calloused from too much laundry, my hair whiter, thinner. I was withering, fading. And Monique knew it, and she did not care. The worst was yet to come. Because a week later, something happened that broke me completely. There are humiliations that hurt for a moment, and there are humiliations that scar you for the rest of your life. Mine arrived on a Saturday in July, It was hot, the kind of thick, sticky heat that makes breathing feel like work. I was in the kitchen preparing a pitcher of iced tea when the doorbell rang. Monique yelled from the bedroom, "Bernadine, go get the door. That's my sister." I wiped my hands on my apron and went to open it. Jessica, Monique's younger sister, was like a louder, cheaper, 22-year-old version of her. Bleached blonde hair, fake lashes curled to the sky, ripped jeans that screamed expensive. "Hey," she said, not bothering to smile, chewing gum loudly. She walked straight into the house without waiting for an invitation. "Come in, make yourself at home," I muttered to the empty air, because she was already gone into the living room. Monique came down the stairs wearing a short white dress, high heels, and enough makeup for a night out, not a Saturday afternoon at home. "Sis!" They hugged as if they hadn't seen each other in years, though Jessica had been over just last week. Steve was on the living room floor playing with Elijah. The baby giggled every time his father made a silly face. The sisters sat on the sofa. I went back to the kitchen, but with the open concept layout, every word drifted clearly into my ears, so clear it hurt, as if I were invisible, or worse, as if they didn't care whether I heard. "So, how's everything?" Jessica asked. "Good, really good. We're getting settled here," Monique replied. "And your mother-in-law? She doesn't mind living with you guys?" Silence. A silence long enough for my hand to stop midair, the knife hovering over a lemon. "Look," Monique said, her voice calm. "It's complicated, but it's fine now. Wait, let me introduce this properly." I heard footsteps. My heart pounded. I wiped my hands on my apron and walked out. Monique gestured toward me the way someone points at a piece of furniture. "Jessica, this is Mrs. Bernadine. She lives here because she has nowhere else to go. We give her a place to stay and meals. She helps us around the house and with the baby." She paused, smiling. "Although, honestly, she's becoming a bit of a burden now. But Steve is too noble to leave her completely alone." The world dropped away beneath me. I have nowhere else to go. They give me a place to stay and food, in my own house, the house I built with my husband, the house I paid for brick by brick, the house that now painted me as a charity case. I looked at Steve. He was right there, just a few feet away. He heard everything. I waited for him to stand up, defend his mother, put his wife in her place. But Steve only lowered his head and held Elijah tighter, and he said nothing, not one word. Jessica turned to me with a fake, sympathetic smile. "Wow, that's nice." Not everyone is as generous as my sister, letting the mother-in-law live with them. Monique laughed. "Yeah, that's life. Come on, I'll show you the nursery. I decorated it myself." Their laughter, the clicking of heels, the sound of them climbing the stairs echoed through the house. My house. I stood alone in the living room. Steve was still on the floor, avoiding my eyes. "Son," I called out, my voice shaking. "Mom, please, not right now." "Not right now? Did you hear what your wife just said?" He stood holding Elijah and finally looked at me. His eyes were tired, empty. "Mom, Monique didn't mean anything. She was just talking. Don't be so sensitive." "Sensitive? She just called me a burden. She said you two are giving me a place to stay in my own house." "Lower your voice. You're scaring the baby." He turned away and began climbing the stairs. "Can we talk later? I don't have the energy for drama right now." Drama. To him, my humiliation was drama. Steve walked away, leaving me standing there alone. I went back to the small room in the back, closed the door, sat on the bed, and covered my mouth with both hands to keep from crying out loud. For the first time in my life, I felt true hatred, a burning hatred that raced through my veins. That night, I didn't come out for dinner. Monique didn't ask a single question. Jessica stayed until late. Laughter, music, glasses clinking, echoing through what used to be my peaceful home. Around 11, when the house was quiet again, I stepped out. I was thirsty. As I passed Steve and Monique's bedroom, the door was slightly ajar. I heard Steve, "Did you have to say that in front of your sister?" "Say what?" Monique asked, bored. "The stuff about my mom, that she's a burden." "Oh, Steve, don't exaggerate. It was a joke." "Didn't sound like a joke." "Well, your mom is too sensitive. She takes everything personally, and besides, it's true, she's old. She doesn't contribute anything. She just uses more water, electricity, food." "That's my mother, Monique. And I'm your wife, the mother of your child. So who are you choosing?" Silence. "See?" she continued. "I'm not telling you to kick her out, but you can't always defend her. She needs to understand her place in this house." My place. In my own house. I turned away before I could hear more. I no longer wanted water. I went back to my room and lay awake for hours, piecing together the truth. My son had chosen, and he did not choose me. If you've ever lived in a house where every comment, every glance reminds you that you are the extra person, you understand how that pain burns. And if the one turning away from you is the child you raised, stay with me. Because after that humiliation, a missing pair of earrings became the spark that lit my revenge. In the days that followed, I lived like a shadow, still cooking, cleaning, washing, caring for Elijah, speaking only when necessary. 1 week later, I went through the cardboard boxes, my new closet, to look for the white gold earrings Edward gave me for our 25th anniversary. I rarely wore them. They were special, slightly heavy but elegant, with tiny diamonds. It took me years before I dared ask him for them. "They're too expensive," he'd once said. Yet on our anniversary, he walked into the house with a small blue box, eyes shining. "You deserve everything, my woman." I opened the small wooden box, carved by Edward himself. The earrings were gone. I searched again, emptied everything. My mother's ring, my first communion necklace, cheap market earrings, not there. Those earrings had been appraised last year at around $4,500. My heart raced. I checked under the bed, dug through every box, every corner. Nothing. Only one possibility remained. Someone had taken them. I walked to the living room. Monique was on the sofa painting her nails while watching a movie. Elijah slept in the crib. "Monique, have you seen my white gold earrings? The ones Steve's father gave me. I kept them in a jewelry box, and now they're missing." She didn't even look up. "No, I don't touch your stuff." "They were there 2 weeks ago. Now they're gone." Monique looked up, eyes cold. "What are you implying? Are you accusing me of stealing?" "No, I'm just asking—" "Steve!" she shouted. "Steve, get down here!" Steve ran downstairs. "What's going on?" Monique stood, looking like a woman wronged. "Your mother just accused me of stealing her earrings." "No, I didn't say—" I tried. "Yes, she did. She asked if I'd seen them, implying I took them. Does she think I need her old jewelry?" She lifted her hand, showing off the earrings she was wearing. "I have my own jewelry, and they're much nicer." "Monique, calm down," Steve said, then turned to me. "Mom, what's happening?" "Son, the white gold earrings your father gave me are gone. I kept them in my jewelry box. Now they're missing." Steve sighed, the kind of sigh that tells you you're already wrong even before you speak. "Mom, maybe you misplaced them, or put them somewhere else." "Steve, I know where I keep my things." "So what are you saying? That Monique took them?" "There, see?" Monique crossed her arms. "I've had enough. I live here trying to be kind to your mother, giving her a place to stay, and now she accuses me of stealing." "Mom." Steve put a hand on my shoulder. "Apologize to her." Something inside me collapsed again. "What?" "Apologize. You can't just accuse people without proof. Keep the peace, Mom. Please?" It was always keep the peace, even when the price was my dignity. I looked at Monique. She was smiling, the smile of someone who had just won. I swallowed hard. "I'm sorry, Monique. I didn't mean to imply anything." "That's better," she said, sitting down and continuing to paint her nails as if she'd just finished watching a show. I went back upstairs to my small room, closed the door. My back slid down the wall, and I knew a part of me died that day. Obedient Bernadine, enduring Bernadine, trusting Bernadine. That woman was gone, and in the empty space she left behind, something else was born. Quieter, colder, more dangerous. A woman with nothing left to lose. The months that followed flowed by like muddy water, thick, heavy, impossible to see through. I kept going through my zombie loop, waking up at 6, making breakfast, taking care of Elijah, cleaning, cooking, doing laundry, going to bed late, sleeping little, then repeating it all. Monique showed her true colors more and more. She didn't even bother to hide it anymore. Bernadine, this is cold. Do it again. Bernadine, how did you iron this blouse? Are you blind? Bernadine, the baby smells. Didn't you bathe him today? And I stayed silent. I did as I was told, like a trained dog. Steve was hardly ever home. He left before dawn and returned when Elijah was already asleep. On weekends, he locked himself in the bedroom, using work as an excuse. My son was hiding from his mother, hiding from reality, hiding from his own cowardice. One Tuesday in November, Elijah had a fever. Not too high, but he was fussy and crying nonstop. Monique stood in the doorway, handbag on her arm, freshly manicured nails sparkling. If it gets worse, take him to the doctor. Call Steve to pay. I have to go to the salon. Can't cancel. She left her sick child with me and walked out. I held Elijah all morning, placing a warm cloth on his forehead, giving him medicine. Slowly the fever dropped, and he fell asleep in my arms. I gently laid him in the crib. Before leaving the room, I remembered Monique had once said, "The electronic thermometer is in the drawer of my nightstand." I went to their bedroom. The bed was messy, clothes thrown everywhere, shopping bags from big malls scattered on the floor, expensive perfume bottles lined up on the vanity. I opened the nightstand drawer, and my world changed from that moment. Inside weren't just medicine and hand cream. In the middle was a stack of papers. My heart started pounding faster. I should have closed the drawer, but something inside me said, "Look." I took the stack of papers out. My hands were shaking. The first sheet was an appraisal of my house, dated 3 weeks earlier. Value, $460,000. The second sheet was a quote from a notary office. Property title transfer fees, $8,500. The third sheet made my blood turn to ice. It was a draft of a purchase contract. Property, this house. Name of the new owner, Monique M. Harris Cole. Not Steve. Monique. I kept reading, my eyes blurring. Seller, Bernadine Cole. Widow, transferring full ownership of the property located at. Sale price, $80,000. $80,000 for a house that had just been appraised at over $400,000. The section below explained everything. This was an internal family agreement. I would sell the house at a low price in exchange for being cared for by my children in old age. The money would be used to buy me a small apartment suitable for an elderly person. Translated into plain language, they would take my house, dump me in a cheap apartment, and pocket the difference. In the middle of the stack was also a handwritten note. Ocean City condo, sell right after. Value about $280,000. Find direct buyer to avoid taxes. I felt as if the floor had just slid out from under my feet. If you've ever heard someone say, "We just want what's best for Mom," but that best always comes with signatures, paperwork, and the loss of assets, then you know exactly how I felt in that moment. And if you're listening to this now, stay with me. Because what they plan to do with my house might be very similar to what someone out there is quietly doing to a mother, a grandmother you know. I took out my phone, my hands still shaking, and took pictures of every page, every line, every note. Then I put everything back exactly where it had been, closed the drawer, and left the room as if no one had ever been in there. Back in my small room, I sat on the bed and opened each photo, looking at them over and over. This was not paranoia, not the imagination of an overly sensitive old woman. Monique didn't just want to humiliate me in my own home. She wanted to take everything: house, land, my entire legacy. And the worst part? Steve had to know. These papers didn't appear by themselves. Someone had to go to the notary office, request an appraisal, get a quote. My son was either complicit or so cowardly he let his wife do whatever she wanted. I didn't know which hurt more. That night, when Steve came home, I waited for him in the kitchen. Monique was upstairs bathing Elijah. "Son, we need to talk." "Mom, I'm really tired today. Can it wait until tomorrow?" "No, today." He sat down across from me, clearly annoyed, like I was just another chore he wanted to get over with. "Steve, are you planning on living here forever?" He froze. "Mom, don't start this again. Answer me. How long do you plan to live here?" He sighed and rubbed his forehead. "To be honest, I don't know. Apartments are expensive now. With a baby, expenses are higher. We're trying to save." "Good. And what about this house? What about it? It's too big for just me, isn't it?" This time, something flickered in his eyes. Something like hope, relief. "Actually, Monique and I have thought about that too. This house is too big for one person. Maintenance, utilities, everything is expensive. Mom, we think it might be better if you sold it." There it was, no sugarcoating, no anesthetic. Sell it? Yes, with that money, you could buy a small apartment, comfortable, no stairs, safer. Whatever's left, you save for old age. We could also look for our own place, a bigger apartment. It'd be better for everyone. He spoke quickly, smoothly, like he'd rehearsed it in the mirror, like they were Monique's words coming out of his mouth. "And what about you?" I asked. "We would find a house or apartment of our own. Haven't decided yet. But don't worry, we're not abandoning you. This is just a suggestion for you to think about." Liar, cowardly liar. I smiled, a cold smile that didn't reach my eyes. "All right, I'll think about it." He exhaled in relief and stood up. "I knew you'd understand. I'm going upstairs to Monique." He left the kitchen, walking up the stairs, the same stairs he once ran up as a little boy, holding a toy car, turning back to shout, "Mom, look at me!" I stayed alone in the kitchen where I had made thousands of meals for him, where I had bandaged scraped knees, where we celebrated birthdays, graduations, all his milestones. And now, in that very place, he had sat across from me and said, "You should sell the house." That night, I didn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling, thinking, threading everything together, the missing earrings, the humiliating comments, the stack of papers in the nightstand drawer. Something inside me broke completely. The old Bernadine, the woman who always forgave, always believed in family, always put her child above everything, was dead. And from those ashes, another woman was born. A woman who had finally learned the hardest lesson. When they take everything from you, the only thing you have left is your sharpness. I, the woman who had been foolish for 3 years, was finally ready to stop being the fool, because they had made a mistake, a fatal one. They underestimated an old woman. The next morning, I woke up with a completely different feeling. No more fear, only a sharp, icy clarity. I ate breakfast with them as usual, poured coffee, cleared the table, smiled as if nothing had happened. "What do you think about selling the house?" Steve asked. "Yes, son, it does sound reasonable. Let me check apartment prices first." Monique looked up, relief gleaming in her eyes. "It's good to see you thinking so sensibly, Mother." I simply smiled. Let them believe that. When Steve left for work and Monique went to yoga, I placed Elijah in his crib, then picked up the phone and called the only person I trusted, Gloria Fenwick, my friend of 40 years and a retired lawyer. "Gloria, I need you." "What happened?" "I can't say it over the phone." "All right, I'm coming." An hour later, Gloria arrived, like always, short gray hair, thick glasses, eyes sharp enough to cut glass. We sat in the backyard. I told her everything. The wedding, the $32,000, the honeymoon, the tiny room, the insults, the missing earrings, and then the house appraisal papers I'd found in Monique's nightstand drawer. Gloria listened silently, her face tightening with each detail. Finally, she said one rare sentence. "That witch." "Whose name is the house under?" "Mine. Edward left it to me." "Good. That means they need to force your signature. That's your leverage." Gloria leaned closer. "Bernie, this isn't a family issue anymore. This is deliberate fraud. You need evidence, recordings, videos, moments when they think you're not listening." "What do I do?" "Hidden cameras. Under $100. Hide one in a picture frame or bookshelf. Just let them talk." I hesitated. What if they find it? "Don't let them. Bernie, if you don't protect yourself, you'll lose everything. You're 68. If you end up with nothing now, how will you survive?" I stayed silent. She was right. "Okay, I'll do it." And if you're listening to this thinking, "I would never let myself be pushed that far," remember this. Victims aren't created in one day. It begins with all the times you stayed silent when you should have spoken. 3 days later, the hidden camera arrived. I hid it inside a frame in the living room, perfect view of the sofa and half the kitchen. I started recording. The first week was nothing special, but in the second week, I captured something that would change everything. Wednesday night, Steve and Monique sat on the sofa with glasses of wine. "What did your mother say?" Monique asked. "She's considering." "She's stalling. This house is worth almost $500,000. If you buy it for $80,000, we make a huge profit." Steve hesitated. "But she's my mother." "She's lived her life already. Now it's our turn. A 2-bedroom apartment is enough for her." Steve asked, "What if she doesn't agree?" Monique leaned back, her voice freezing the air. "Then we pressure her. Make her life uncomfortable enough that she'll sign. She's scared of being alone. She won't dare kick us out." Steve sighed. Monique smirked. "Smart people take advantage of fools. All we need is her signature. Even if she sues, she doesn't have money for a lawyer." And then they laughed. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding outside my ribcage. But at the same time, something else rose inside me. Calmness. I had what I needed. The next morning, I sent the video to Gloria. She called back immediately. "Bernie, perfect. This is clear evidence of fraudulent intent, underpricing, mental pressure, exploiting your vulnerability." But before hanging up, her voice dropped. "Bernie, be extremely careful. Someone who's willing to steal your home is capable of things you can't imagine. Don't underestimate her." I should have listened more closely. But at that moment, I had only one thought. For the first time in years, I was no longer the prey. 2 weeks later, I kept recording, kept playing the role of the obedient old mother. Every time Steve asked, "Have you thought more about selling the house, Mom?" I simply smiled. "I'm still looking into it. Give me a little more time." Monique's impatience became more and more obvious. Every time I answered that way, her lips tightened just a little more. 3 days before the incident in the garage, I overheard a conversation that froze my blood. "I can't wait any longer," Monique said, her voice stretched tight like a violin string. "Your mother needs to sign, or we find another way." "What way?" Steve asked, exhausted. "I don't know yet, but something needs to happen for her to understand how vulnerable she is. She needs to know she's fragile." The next day, Monique left early. She said, "I have a doctor's appointment." But my instincts told me that was a cheap lie. I called a taxi and followed her. Monique drove to an old, run-down garage in one of the worst parts of the city, not the place she and Steve usually took their cars for service. From inside the taxi, I watched her talk to a man. They stood behind a corner wall, but not out of my sight. Monique pulled a stack of cash from her purse, blue and white bills. I couldn't count them, but it looked like a few $100s. The man took the money, nodded, shook her hand. Monique smiled, the relaxed smile of someone who had just handled something. I went home feeling as if a stone were lodged in my stomach. 2 days later, on Thursday, it happened. Monique walked down the stairs wearing a yellow dress, high heels, makeup done perfectly, as if heading to a party. "Bernadine, tomorrow morning go to Lexington Market for me, okay? Take my car." I froze. "Your car?" "Yes, your car is too old. Mine has air conditioning. Tomorrow will be hot. Use mine so you won't struggle." Monique had never allowed me to touch her car. That sentence alone smelled of danger. "The keys are on the table by the door. Just take it tomorrow." Something was wrong. Extremely wrong. That night, around 11, when everyone was asleep, I took a flashlight and went down to the garage. I got on my knees beside Monique's silver sedan and shined the light under the car. A wet stain, yellowish, oily, a small puddle forming, brake fluid. My heart stopped. The brake hose to the front left wheel had a clean, sharp cut. Precise. Smooth. Something done with a blade. This wasn't wear and tear. This was sabotage. Monique had paid someone to cut the brakes on her own car, and the next morning she insisted I drive it. I sank onto the cold cement floor. If I took that car onto the I-95, down the ramp, reached a red light, the brakes would give out. The car would shoot forward. An accident. Maybe fatal. And on paper, it would look like a mechanical failure. Monique would be innocent. Steve would inherit everything. Monique would control it all. A perfect plan. Almost perfect. Because she made one mistake. She underestimated the old woman she thought was foolish. I stood up. My knees shook, but my mind had never been clearer, colder. Monique wanted to play with death. Fine. I would show her what it felt like when that game turned around and breathed down her neck. I went upstairs, picked up my phone, and searched for a name I hadn't dialed in a very long time. Lillian Harris, Monique's mother, a small woman, a cleaner for a living. The same woman her own daughter had seated at the very last table during the wedding reception. I pressed the call button. "Hello?" Her voice was sleepy, raspy. "Mrs. Lillian, it's Bernadine. I'm sorry for calling so late. I have a doctor's appointment tomorrow at 7. My car has been acting up lately, and Monique told me to use hers to make things easier. But I'm not good at driving. Would you be able to take me instead?" "Of course, Mrs. Bernadine." I swallowed the lump in my throat. "And one more thing. Monique said it'd be best if you just take her car, so you don't have to spend gas. You can come by and pick up the key. I'll leave it on the table by the door." Silence. My daughter said that? A simple question. But in her voice was the weight of a lifetime of being forgotten. Monique had never lent her mother anything. Ever. "Yes, she said it last night," I lied, with a calmness so cold it didn't feel like me. "All right, I'll come in the morning." I hung up, sat on my bed. My hands were still shaking. What had I just done? I had just handed the key to a car with cut brakes, to the mother of the woman who planned to kill me. I pressed both hands to my face, but this time I didn't cry. I wasn't planning to let Lillian die. That was never the intention. I wasn't trading lives. My plan was clear. Let Lillian get into the car, then call the police to report sabotage, hand over the evidence, photos of the cut brake line, the recording of Monique and Steve. When the police inspected the car, the truth would be exposed. At least, that's what I kept telling myself. I lay down, eyes wide open in the dark. No sleep, just waiting. Waiting for dawn. Waiting for the day everything would change forever. In a way that, at that moment, I still believed I could control. 5 a.m., I woke up. I put on a gray blouse and old jeans, went downstairs to make coffee, my hands trembling just slightly under the weight of a terrible premonition. I picked up my phone and typed a message to Gloria. If you don't hear from me in a few hours, the yellow envelope under my mattress, give it to the police. I didn't send it. I left it there, like a life raft. 6:15, Monique came down the stairs in her pink satin robe. Good morning, Bernadine. Up early? Couldn't sleep. Tomorrow you're taking my car to the market, right? Her eyes scanned me, searching for clues. I kept my voice calm. Yes, thank you. She smiled, the smile of someone convinced her plan was airtight. Drive carefully, okay? Those morning roads can be dangerous. 6:30. The doorbell rang. Lillian arrived. My daughter, she really told me to use her car? She asked, still sleepy, confused. I looked straight into her eyes, forcing myself to stay in character. Yes, she said so last night. I led her out to the garage, opened the car for her as if it were nothing more than a simple favor. I changed plans. My neighbor will take me. You go ahead and use the car. Lillian smiled, gentle, honest, heartbreakingly sincere. You're too kind. She backed the car out of the garage, slowly, carefully, then disappeared at the end of the street. I stood frozen, then nearly collapsed. I ran inside, dialed 911. A car is on the road with its brakes cut. Please stop it immediately. I gave the plate number, location, and added, My daughter-in-law did it. I have proof. I hung up and called Gloria, sobbing. Bernie, breathe. You did the right thing. Stay there. I'm on my way. People think the scariest moment in life is facing the villain. It's not. The scariest moment is realizing you just sent an innocent person into the position meant for you, and there's no way to pull them back. Upstairs, I heard screaming. Where are my car keys? Monique stormed down the stairs, hair tangled, face pale. I gave them to your mother. What? Your mother came to pick me up. I did exactly what you said. She burst into real panic, the panic of someone realizing the trap she set has snapped on the wrong person. No. She grabbed her phone, called Lillian, put it on speaker. Hello? Lillian's voice was still cheerful. Mom, where are you? In your car, honey. Bernie let me... Stop the car! The brakes are cut! Use the handbrake! Don't press the pedal! A beat of silence, then a scream, tires skidding, a deafening crash, people shouting, sirens. The phone slipped from Monique's hand. She crumpled onto the couch, mouth trembling uncontrollably. Steve rushed downstairs. What's going on? I picked up the phone, called again. Mrs. Lillian, can you hear me? Nothing but the sound of distant ambulance sirens. I turned to Monique. You cut the brakes to kill me, and your own mother got into that car. Monique sobbed, screaming, No, not for her. It wasn't supposed to be her. It was supposed to be you. Steve stared at his wife as if seeing a stranger for the first time. What did you just say? Monique clamped a hand over her mouth, but it was too late. When the police arrived, I opened the door and pointed straight at her. She sabotaged the brakes. I have the evidence. My phone rang. Are you the relative of Mrs. Lillian Harris? I'm her daughter-in-law's mother-in-law. Mrs. Harris is being transported to the hospital. Critical condition. My knees gave out. I sank onto the cold floor. Hospitals always smell like disinfectant mixed with waiting room fear. Monique was handcuffed in the back of a patrol car. Steve sat in another, face buried in his hands. I went with Gloria. We waited 2 hours. A surgeon came out. Mrs. Harris has severe head trauma, broken ribs, internal bleeding. She's in surgery. We can't say anything yet. Will she survive? I asked. We're doing everything we can. Detective Martinez arrived to take my statement. I handed over everything. Photos, recordings, videos. Why didn't you call the police as soon as you discovered the cut brakes? I choked. Because I wanted to expose my daughter-in-law. I thought if Mrs. Lillian got in the car, but I called 911 immediately, the police would stop her in time. I didn't think it would be too late. I just wanted justice after 3 years of abuse. Your actions have legal consequences. I'm going to be arrested? The prosecutor will decide. For now, you're not allowed to leave the city. 3 hours later, the surgeon returned. She survived the surgery, but the injuries are severe. Fractured hip, 3 broken ribs, head trauma. Recovery will be long. There may be lasting effects. But she will live? Yes. I sank into the chair and burst into tears. Relief and guilt hit me at the same time. Lillian lived, but her life had been broken in some ways, and I, though not the one who cut the brakes, was still the one who sent her into that car. 3 years later. I am 71 now, sitting in the garden, sunlight warm on my hands. 3 years. From hell to healing. Lillian lives with me. She walks with a cane, but she has reclaimed her peace. We are like sisters, bonded by a pain neither of us deserved. Monique is serving a 12-year sentence. She sends apology letters sometimes. I don't reply. Some forgiveness is only meant to exist in silence. Steve divorced her. He has remarried. Patricia, a gentle, honest kindergarten teacher. Their wedding was held in my backyard, simple and warm. Elijah is 6 now. Every Friday he sleeps over at my house. Lillian and I make quesadillas and tell him stories about his grandpa Edward and about this home. One day, this house will be yours, I tell him. Really, Grandma? Really. But you have to promise to cherish it. A house isn't just walls. It's memories. It's love. I promise. And I believe him. From everything I've lived through, I've learned one truth. Family is not always blood. Sometimes, family is the one who catches you when your own blood lets you fall. Revenge is not sweet. It's bitter, tangled, and leaves scars on the one who seeks it. Forgiveness isn't forgetting. Forgiveness is letting go of what's burning you so it doesn't kill you first. And an old woman of 71 with silver hair and deep wrinkles can be far stronger than anyone expects. If you hear this story and recognize yourself in any part of it, remember, you are not alone. Your dignity is yours. No one has the right to take it. Protect yourself. Record everything. Find allies. And do not give up. Because real wealth is not what you own. It's what you refuse to let them steal. Peace, dignity, home, life, those things are priceless.